Well, yeah. My name is Sheldon Lee Glashow, and I'm a theoretical physicist, retired, although I used to teach at Stanford and Berkeley and MIT, Harvard, and Boston University. Now I don't teach any longer. Well, you don't, quantum physics is not something that you jump in without knowing classical physics. That is, the study of physics has to be historical. So you have to start at some early point with Newton and with Newtonian mechanics and understand that. And then you have to study electrodynamics, which dates to the 1860s or so. You have to know those things. Because it's only from the framework of electrodynamics that you can understand relativity. You can't just jump in without knowing mechanics and without knowing electricity and magnetism. There's no way to jump into the subject of quantum mechanics. So it doesn't come at the beginning. It comes at later on upon your education. Yes, we can talk about the uncertainty principle, we can talk about the wave-particle duality, but it's not going to make sense to you unless you understand something of the rest of physics. And at many points, there have been attempts to reduce the number of forces, as you say. Even when we talk about electromagnetism, when we talk about four, electromagnetism is itself a unification of two different forces, which are, on the face of it, entirely different from one another. Electricity, which we see when we make lightning or sparks, and magnetism, which is exotic and has to do with pieces of iron that stick together. Nothing could seem more different from magnetic forces than electric forces. But in the middle of the 19th century, it was realized by James Clerk Maxwell that electricity and magnetism are different aspects of the same force, and even can turn into one another under appropriate circumstances. So then there would have been five were it not for Maxwell's unification of electric and magnetic forces. Now, even with four, it seemed that there were too many. And history is rife with examples of people trying to reduce the number of four to smaller numbers. For example, the great Japanese physicist Yukawa in the 1930s invented what he called a mesotron, which we today shorten to meson, to explain nuclear forces. And to a certain extent he was successful, but he introduced this particle to explain both the strong nuclear force, which holds protons and neutrons together, and the weak nuclear force, which is responsible for things like beta radioactivity. And that unification failed. But he was not alone. Einstein then tried to unify electromagnetism with gravity. And to the end of his life, he was trying to do this, but he also failed. So what I did is, under the advice of my advisor at Harvard, who told me to unify the weak and electromagnetic forces. He told me some properties that they have in common, which are universality and a vectorial nature. And he said, surely you ought to be able to combine these things together. And that's what I worked on. I was going to, when I left Harvard, go to Russia and continue to work there, but mercifully, they never gave me a visa. So I went to Copenhagen, and it was in Copenhagen that I had the idea of how to change the structure of the theory so that it is possible, at least possible, to imagine a unification between weak and electromagnetic forces. That was back in 1960, but many things had to happen before that could become a reality in the 1970s. And that's a long story. The main goals of quantum mechanics is to better understand chemistry and biology. It is a tool that lets us create new structures like transistors and you name it, and to enable the progress of science in many directions, in all of the things that are coming out of California, smartphones, AI, you name it. All of this stuff is quantum mechanical in nature. And my colleague at Harvard, for example, Lena Howe, is devoted to showing how you can slow light down. And she creates circumstances in which light goes as fast as somebody walking along the street. Not 300,000 kilometers per second, but 1 mile an hour. She's even stopped light. This has nothing to do with unifying the forces. This has to do with understanding quantum mechanics and understanding nature. So no, there are a few people here and there who work on the unification of forces, but that's a trivial part of the quantum mechanical universe. Well, you don't start in with quantum mechanics. You start in with simpler things like a bouncing ball. You explain why balls bounce and why they don't keep bouncing because of friction, how they stop, how motion likes to continue. All of the basic principles. The best way to teach physics is with a billiard table and to demonstrate not to a 5-year-old, but perhaps to a 10-year-old, what's going on a billiard table. It's a very great honor. It's the greatest honor that a scientist or a writer can aspire to. So, of course, I was very much impressed. And it happened at a early stage in my life when I had 4 kids and was able to bring them all to the ceremony, and along with my brothers who were alive at the time and my wife. So it was a family occasion and a very exciting occasion. And yes, it's been a very important part of my life because it is, as for example, as a Nobel laureate, that I have been coming to this occasion here in Valencia every year for the last, 20 years, maybe more. Any of my colleagues could have served equally well as a judge of the Jaime Prize, but the reason that I am chosen as a judge is that I'm a Nobel Prize winner. So yes, winning the Nobel Prize does change one's life. Well, contributions to Spanish science and Spanish innovation, of course, because so many brilliant Spanish, mostly Spanish. The work has to be done in Spain, not necessarily by a Spanish person, so I have to be careful with my language. But so many people aspire to win this prize. I see this from the nominations, and I see how much really good science is being done. I'm in the prize for innovation, so I see work in physics, chemistry, computer science, you name it. And I'm very impressed by the quality of, the increasing quality of Spanish science. I've watched it change over the years. In my life, I've seen Spain, which was very much a backwater of science in the 19th century and most of the 20th century, emerge as a very strong scientific power. One of my first and dearest collaborators is Spanish, Álvaro de Rújula, and I've written 30 papers with that man, and so I also experienced the bad parts of Spanish science. One of my classmates at Harvard, when I was writing my thesis as a graduate student, was a person named Luis Garrido. And Garrido was, as I was, a student of Schwinger, but he never did write his thesis. But he said he did, and he went back to Spain, and he became very highly respected in Spain, but he was a complete charlatan. So I've seen the bad part of Spanish physics in the person of Luis Garrido, and I've seen the great part of it in people like de Rújula, and people like I don't have it on the tip of my tongue, but so many distinguished Spanish physicists. So science is also a spectacularly international discipline, and that's another attractive feature. I first saw this when I worked in Copenhagen, because I didn't get to Russia because the Russians didn't give me a visa, but I was for some years at CERN and in Copenhagen, and I was able to meet so many young scientists from behind the Iron Curtain, from China, from Japan, from all over the world. And no other discipline is quite so fully international. Well, my father saw the first elevators in New York City. My father saw the creation of the George Washington Bridge, of what was the highest building in the world, of what was the biggest telescope in the world, the beginning of radio, early cars, and the first automatic transmission. We had an Oldsmobile in 1942, which had the first automatic transmission, and I took that car to Cornell when I went to school, and I managed to wreck it, unfortunately. But we see the appearance of better and better technologies. Today, we see autonomous cars. If you live in California, you can take an autonomous taxi, even today. You see the continuous progress of science. You see things like this watch, which is an Apple Watch, which keeps track of my physical activity and makes sure that I exercise properly. For better or for worse, much of the change of human society over the past centuries has been due to science. It's science that leads us to live lives of over 90 years old in reasonably good health. That was not in the 1930s. That was a very rare thing, to be healthy and 90 years old. So science plays a very important role in our lives. And That's obvious, and those people who try to interfere with the progress of science are sadly mistaken. One way is to give them a love of science, and the way to do that is to have teachers who love the science that they're teaching. And one of the big problems in my country is that we don't very well respect teachers. Teachers in elementary school, we don't pay them very well, and hence they're not very well trained. It's very hard to teach science if you don't know science. It's very hard to teach mathematics if you don't know and love mathematics. If you had teachers, as I did, who loved what they were doing, it helps to make the student love science and mathematics. And I, fortunately, attended wonderful schools. Living in New York, I could attend the Bronx High School of Science. My high school has had 9 Nobel laureates. No other high school in the world has 9 Nobel laureates. Wow. The closest is the school in Paris, which had 7, which is pretty good. And after that, the next are some good American high schools with 5, but that 2 of them. It helps to be at such a high school because of the teachers, but even more importantly, because of the students. Because what the Bronx High School of Science did, which made it so successful in terms of Nobel laureates, was by bringing together all of the mathematically or scientifically inclined kids. Any young kid in New York, if they wanted to do science, would be attracted to go to either the Bronx High School of Science or 1 or 2 other schools that focused on these kids. And it is because I had classmates that were fascinated by science that I remained interested in science. But in physics, well, it's perfectly amazing that we can understand what used to be puzzles, especially if you're familiar with the history of physics. You find how gradually people from different countries managed to put this whole story together. To take electromagnetism, for example. One of the first people to work on electromagnetism was what's his name in Britain, who was the first person in the 17th century to realize that the Earth itself is a magnet. And of course the Chinese had discovered the magnetic compass, but he understood the magnetic compass by thinking that the Earth itself was in some way magnetized. And of course he didn't know, he said that, but he didn't know what it meant. But it took people like, beginning with Coulomb, who studied electricity, and Ampere, who was the first person to try to understand both electricity and magnetism. There was that Danish guy, Ørsted, who was the first to see how electricity can make magnetism. And then there was Faraday, who showed that magnetism can make electricity. And it gradually, people from different countries got together and created what we call electromagnetic theory, all put together by James Clerk Maxwell. So from the beginning, it was a very international game, and its internationality is even more apparent today when there are 110 different nations working at CERN. Not all as members, there are only, I think, 20 members of CERN who pay for CERN, but there are another 100 countries from all over the world, from Africa, from Asia, from all of the continents. So what can I say? Whenever I travel, and the most difficult prediction, the most lengthy prediction, which was actually for work which was done in 1964, not by me, was the prediction of the Higgs boson. And it took from 64 until 2012, 48 years for this prediction to be realized, to be proven to be correct. It was July 4th in 2012. 4th of July. It was not an American discovery. It was a discovery at CERN. But it was celebrated throughout the world. Yeah, what more can I say? CERN, science is fascinating, science is beautiful, science has accomplished so very much, both at the frontier of the highest energies, but also at the frontier of deep time, where we understand the history of the universe, to an amazing extent, but with, of course, problems that remain. It's not that the game is over. It's not that we've answered all the questions. There are still problems with the so-called standard model of particle physics, and there are still problems with the so-called standard model of cosmology. So challenges remain. They won't have anything to do with products any more than the Higgs boson or strange particles do, but they will have to do with our understanding of the universe. The message is that science is alive and well, and that the challenges remain, and all that we need are a continuous flow of youngsters who are fascinated by science and willing to devote their lives to its study, which is not exactly a painful thing to do, because university professors today are not poor, but they are respected members of the community. So go out there and study science, and maybe you too will have the privilege of being a university professor.